sort of like spin back on point with the topic.
He's been brief. We've been watching
I think you mentioned that you have dyslexia, so I think that'd be a good point.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that as well.
Yeah,
actually.
I think
is that why you wanted to go into spoken word more than sort of traditional written poetry?
Yeah.
Even though that doesn't have any grammatical rules to it either.
Yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one. So I've never been diagnosed with dyslexia. Right. I've even often wondered whether I'm also dyspraxic, because I'm very, very like, I know it's not the only trait, but I tend to fall over a lot, bump into things a lot, and I drop things a lot.
So what is that, sorry?
Dyspraxia is, sorry.
No, please, go on.
Dyspraxia is where you're not sure where your limbs are. So,
right.
So like normally, if I was to do, if I was to reach that glass door, look, I could reach it.
Yeah.
If I was dyspraxic, I'd probably be over here because you can't really,
Right.
you can't feel where stuff is.
Right.
Well, some of the kids we teach at swimming, one of them has it definitely, and she's so cute because she's got the biggest grin on her face, and her arms will go out here.
Yeah.
And you're like, I love you so much, but seriously, go up.
Yeah. Because it's interesting. So with the dyslexia, I've diagnosed myself really, and I think, like I say, reading didn't come easy to me, and I there's a part of me that feels like the cockney. My first job was at 15 on a market stall in Roman Road, and I was immersed in language. Cool. To me, the language was art, and language had always been art, So that's how I learned to read, by sound. And actually, if you think babies learn to read with their ears first, right? So reading comes to us through sound. So I always...
You sound it out, don't you?
Yeah, and I still do. Phonetically, I still will sound a lot of things out. And even... So when I went off to uni and I had to do all these kind of big essays, studying didn't come easy to me at all, but I was determined to get an education. And I had always been taught that, even my teachers were like... you've got to go to uni. And I'm like, but am I the kind of person that goes to uni? And they're like, who is the kind of person that goes to uni? But people? I felt like I wasn't that person because I was from the East End, and I thought I had to be more middle class, I guess. And little did I know, right? But yeah, it wasn't really until I went into journalism that I struggled a bit with some aspects of writing and grammar. And then I loved journalism, but it never felt fully creative enough for me.
That's how I felt about it as well.
So to interrupt quickly, what was it journalism you did in university?
No, so my degree was in first I did a year of psychology, and then decided to defer, and I deferred onto history, and I did some modules in sociology and anthropology. And because I'd always been interested in humanities and human story.
That's a lot of ground to cover as well.
Well, interestingly though, if you think, growing up in the East End, immersed in story, immersed in the everyday, and I'd always been drawn to the everyday person that had so much proudness and humility, but they didn't have much, but they had and they had character, they had spirit, and
confidence. I think that's quite an interesting point, because a lot of the time nowadays, a lot of people, at least a lot of people I tend to meet, like that kind of confidence seems to be almost not quite frowned upon, but if you've got that kind of strong character, it's almost seen as being sort of not, something that people...
Not composed, it's almost a bit...
Or intent, or a bit much, or something like that.
And you're right, it's almost like...
It's almost a negative
you've not been
connotation
trained. I remember going to uni and feeling like I wasn't polished, in a way where I was just being myself, and maybe it was a bit messy in parts.
People tend to be a bit slippery.
Yeah,
a bit
they
boring.
can be, yeah.
It's very dull when you have a conversation with something that's that polished. That
you don't get the authenticity, I don't think.
Yeah, it's creepy.
Yeah.
It's really creepy.
So then the journalism for me was amazing. It was the most knowledgeable job I've ever done, and I'd done it with heart and joy, but it never paid enough. And for me, it was like a lot of people that I moved in, the circle I moved in at the time, they were doing it for leisure, not living. And I had to make sure I had a job.
You have to be middle class to be a journalist. That's why they're all middle class.
It was an elitist profession. Yeah, it really was.
You can't afford it unless you've got someone backing you a bit.
And so, without going into the whole length of it, when I came out of journalism and went and lived in Oz for a bit, and whilst I was in Oz, I dabbled in journalism, mainly did a bit of photography, and then I returned home. My mum had been sick, and my family became her carers, and then off the back of that, trained as a teacher, rediscovered a joy of education again, and it's almost like I went back to school myself and filled the gaps that I had as a child. And then it wasn't until I was about 5 years into teaching I realised it wasn't a career for life. No. I did an MA in play
it's
therapy.
The money, isn't it? Again,
yeah. I did an MA in play therapy, and whilst training to be a creative arts therapist, I was reconnected with the joy of diary keeping again and rock journaling. And it was from the journaling that I just first started to write down again in rhythmic fashion. And even as a child I wrote a lot of poetry. I've got friends that I've reconnected with that said, do you not remember writing me this poem when you were 11?
Aww.
You know, and I'd forgotten all that part of myself post mum dying, almost like the grief had blocked it out. But so in answer to your question with the dyslexia and all the suspected dyslexia and then the spoken word, yes, I mean, gosh, spoken word, when I tell friends I do it now, they're like, oh my God, of course that was so for you. Of course that's what you had to do, you know, like, because you've always been able to speak for England, you know, and you've always been...
That's a little bit backhanded, that one, isn't it?
It is a bit backhanded, yeah, and I didn't, and actually in one of my poems, I don't know if you've watched any of them, but there's one poem called What's a Free Word Worth, and there's a bit in it where I call out those people and I say... oh God, I'll have to... there's a part where I say...
I was going to ask about this as well.
Yeah,
go ahead.
there's a part where I kind of say... because sometimes I felt like people made me feel like I spoke thick. So I'd say, talk thick, socially awkward or socially advanced, mate. I could talk underwater, damn right. I could talk the iron legs off a donkey, damn straight. Hanging off your ear roll, because this eloquentious babbler's got soul. I could talk for England, I hope so, let's go. So it's this idea that, if you backhand me, I'll meet you there and say, I fucking can, and it's a skill. You know, it's this golden skill to be able to talk, you know. And you're right, like there was points in my life where I was ridiculed for being such an over-talker. And it wasn't until I trained to be a therapist, I'll never forget being held...
So play therapist or sort of like sit down and listen
the play therapy is still... You still have to go through like counselling training.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're doing the training, you're in a room with 15 other people. I'll never forget the facilitator who like led the whole course. We explored all different masks that we'd put on and... you know, the kind of parts of ourselves that we don't show because we feel that they're a little bit more tainted. And when I kind of revealed that I'd always felt like my mouth had been censored a bit because I'd always been made to feel like I talked too much, she was like, no, Lou, like, the world needs all sorts of people and the world needs talkers. The world needs people that, you know, and when someone comes, someone turns around and calls you Bobby,
the wrong kind of people, I think.
They're trying to keep you pushed down, you know. So the spoken word, it gives me freedom, and spoken word, it was almost like me sticking my finger up at the people that made me feel like I didn't, just because I didn't have all the right grammar tools doesn't mean I couldn't write, because I fucking could.
No,
and just because I spoke cockney, I could write.
If anything, you've kind of really gone for that kind of, you know, someone's told you can't do something, you've literally made a career.
But I've almost like, it wasn't until I trained as a therapist, you know, the writing came out of me in a way. Like one of my poems, which I haven't performed in a while, it's called If Walls Could Talk, and it's about domestic violence, because as a child my sister and I experienced it and witnessed it, and because I'd been exploring a lot around my childhood memories and the memories of my home and my father and my mum, I wrote this initially in a journal. And it came out, and it was just like that. The first line, like, if walls could talk, they'd say, it started way back before you were even born, way back before your parents laid together, when your ancestors, they didn't know any better. You know, and it just kind of spilled out of me, because I'd been reading all this stuff up about neuroscience, and I started to really come to understand where trauma and intergenerational stuff comes from.
Do you mind if I ask if, was that directed towards your mother, or was it to you?
The poem itself?
No, the violence.
No, it was towards my mother, and, you know, never to condone it, but on a pyramid of, like, you know, if you went up on a scale of domestic abuse, it was certainly not by any stretch the worst. It was emotional abuse predominantly towards my mother, and near the end of the relationship, physical abuse, and then my mum left. And actually,
by your father?
By my father, yeah. And it wasn't until my parents... it wasn't until really it became a little bit more physical that my mum left. And my sister and I, for years, that night that my mum left my father played out in her head like a motion picture. And because no one had ever spoken to us about it, because there was quite poor emotional communication in our home.
That generation in general.
It was like it just kept playing and playing. So when I finally got to a point where I could release it, it released through poetry. So all of a sudden, I've stepped into this this new paradigm, this new arena where not only am I reconnecting with my love of writing, which was what made my heart sing as a child, I'm now connecting with my truth, my narrative, and I'm believing that there's a way that I can merge my love of writing and my narrative, and I can share it in the hope that it resonates with other people. And when I stepped in front of those open mics for the first time, it was never, of course you get a hit of dopamine from it and stuff like that, but it was never from a place of ego. It was from a place of healing. It was because it was like a final tip of the cap to the thing I'd been through, and it wasn't. And people would say, "You're so brave talking about such raw stuff," and I'd say, "No, the brave part is admitting it, realizing it, and then when you share it, you're letting it go. You're giving it out there and hoping it supports other people in that journey.
Right stuff.
So can I take you back to when you first did spoken word and what that was like?
I wanted to ask
what prompted you to doing that?
And also, what was it like? Sorry, we shouldn't double it. Yeah, go on. But I just wanted, if I could just touch on it actually. The first time you stood in front of the mic and did it, what did that feel like?
Wow, there's two really, because I started performing first over Instagram. Right. Yeah, and it was during over COVID. Sorry, I'm a teacher. I can say this, although it wasn't like I was moonlighting, but I was doing home learning. So obviously, when we were off, when we weren't doing the online learning, I was going to the park and I was sometimes writing. And my friend that I'd met at the gym kept sending me these sharing the profiles via Instagram of poet nights, and she was going, "You're so good. You've got to go to one of these.
She keeps saying about stand up with me."
And she kept sending me them, right? And I was like, "Oh fuck, I don't know." So anyway, I started following this guy from Southend called Sonny Green, fantastic poet. Look Sonny Green up if you haven't already. And he used to run a night called Trouble Tongues, and so I used to follow his Instagram lives, and I was like, "Wow, this is really good." And he started inviting people to go on, so I just thought, "Fuck it, I'm going to send an invite." So I sent an invite, and I was thinking, he won't recognise my name, he won't invite me on. And then lo and behold, it was like, "We're zooming into your living room."
Oh, fuck, I should have tidied.
And all of a sudden...
You're looking around, you're like, there are too many bottles in here for this to be public.
All of a sudden, there's me and Sonny Green on the screen, and I've still got the footage, and I've still got the stills, and I look so elated. I look young. Aww. I look so fresh-faced. It's like I look like I've reconnected with what I term like the maiden in me, the younger woman in me, that had all those aspirations to be, because when I was a journalist, I wanted to be a newsreader, I wanted to go into radio, I wanted to do all this stuff, and I kept hitting the glass ceiling. So, and I never felt like, I felt my time, in a way, I felt like my time to write and my time to present on the rate was over. Yeah. Especially when I was teaching and I'd lost my mum, and I was in a mindset where I was like, "Oh, that's my past life, and now this is my new life." And it was taking me, the grief was stopping me from reconnecting with that old life. So anyway, I'm in front of Sonny Green, and I performed If Walls Could Talk. And he reached out to me afterwards and said, "Wow, like one of the very first poem raps," because he's quite rappy, "that I ever performed was about domestic violence. The video's still on YouTube, go and check it out." And then after COVID, after the lockdown was lifted, Sonny did an open mic night at the Jargo in Dalston, which is where it used to happen. And I went down, and as soon as I'd given my name Curly Wordy, because I loved Curly Wordies when I was a kid.
I bet your handwriting's phenomenal.
Yeah.
My wife loves them as well.
So little love hearts and stuff.
I've been called Curly Whirly a few times on stage. I'm like, "No, it's Curly Wordy." But anyway, I went down to his night, right? And as soon as I walked in, he went to me, "Curly Wordy, you're going on stage." And I was like, "Oh my God, am I?" And I was like, "No, I just thought I'd come and sit in the background." And it was nerve-wracking. I was, my chest was pumping like the adrenaline, and the heart was
They look
pumping.
at you like as a judge, like you just
Yeah,
sit there.
you're thinking, are you worried about the judgment of others, or are you judging yourself? I think part of it's about self-judgment, and as soon as I got up there, I just thought, fuck it, in the end.
So do you mind if I cut in quickly? Are you quite confident in terms of public speaking in the first place?
I was to a point where and this is interesting, what I said earlier about my birthmarks. Even sometimes things can come back and benefit you. I think I was so used to being stared at as a kid, because people would come up to me and they, again, one of my poems mark my words, there's a point where I say, chin gazing at my Orion, that plump red crimson skin, part of my facial constellation built in. Because people would come up to me and just stare at my chin like that. It's like they were staring into my chin.
My eyes are up here, thank you, darling.
That's what it felt like. And I'd be waiting anxiously for them to go, what's that? And it was always the way so it's almost like whenever I went into social situations, I had dread. Yeah, but years later, I think the fact that I had that means that when I got up and I had people looking at me, and back then when I was a kid, you know, take it how you wish, take it how you will. It might be seen as sad, but you know, back then people were looking at me as a kid, and I was thinking all sorts of things. What are they thinking? Sometimes they were thinking horrible things. So now, all these years later as an adult, I don't give a fuck what you think of me. Now,
so
because of that, I think, you know, so if you're looking at me and thinking, like, they'll look at the state of her hair, or look, she's got a bogey hanging out of her nose, or whatever it is. No, I have had a bogey hanging out of my nose once, right? I went go-karting, right, at university with a group of 4 boys, two of which I lived with. Yes, Andy Britton and James Hopkins, yeah, and I won. Right,
oh, nice.
And I was gloating.
Is that because you were quite light compared to the lads? Because I found that.
Yeah, and I was gloating. I was happy, and I went into the changing room to get changed, and I had a bogey sitting over my nose, like it was actually hooked over my nose, like. And not one of them said, "Oh, you know, you got to." Yeah, I bet they probably thought, "You smug, shall we, love? You smug."
Let's get a good selfie for old time's sake. There she is. Love it.
With a bogey. Oh. But yeah, so so with the open mic thing, it was so amazing, you know. And what I say to people now is, when you get that feeling, it's your heart letting you know you're in the right place, you know. It's okay to get those nerves, and actually if you say on stage to someone or to people, God, wow, it's been a while I felt this nervous, it all plays to the authenticity that people read from you, because you don't want to be fake. You know, I certainly, the stories I share are all my own narrative, so
it has to be, otherwise it doesn't kind of come across the same way. It's like if you write fiction, it's not quite the same.
It's not. It's nice to, you know, so it snowballed from there really, and it was the first time in a very long time, I have to say, and a big shout out to the spoken word community. They're very welcoming, and it's a tribe of people who, different strokes for different folks, but you'll never be met with any negativity. And every event I've gone into, your vibration is matched, your energy is matched, so you're there. And
if you're absolutely shitting, and the whole audience suddenly sitting there going, "Oh Christ!"
But people want you to do well, you know. And I've never been really, because obviously in journalism, as you know, you don't get to like in poetry and spoken word, they often say to the audience, make sure you give the poets their flowers, which means verbal thanks, right? And in journalism, you know, you don't get that verbal thanks. You don't get feedback really on how well you've done.
I asked about this yesterday, this morning. It's like you kind of like put it out there in the hope that it does something.
Yeah, but you don't ever hear anything, like, unless it's a complaint sometimes.
Yeah, usually.
But with spoken word, you'll get, like, the amount of events I've been to, and I'll leave with my cup overflowing, and I've not asked those people to come up to me and say, "Wow, that one about your mum really touched me."
Is that for tips?
It was
like your emotional cup.
Oh, okay, emotional cup.
Yeah, so it's like they'll come up and they'll say to you, you know, that when I read my one about my birthmark, which is one I really love reading because it's a really empowering piece. This girl came up to me at the end that had suffered really severely with acne, you know, and we had this long chat, and she was like, "I've never something has never resonated with me so much," and she even DM'd me afterwards saying, you know, I was so moved, I you know, you brought me to tears, you know, and it's nice when
you write something and it makes someone cry in a good way. That's something that you never forget. I've written love letters before, and like when, you know, like you see that tear go down and you're like, got him.
I'm yet to write a love poem, but at some point I will. But I think it might be about my you know, it's hard to explain, like my growth through the path of relationships, because again, I never really had, you know, I mean, my dad's love language is acts of service, you know, and he's great at DIY.